All good? Yeah, good. Okay, so this really came about from when I studied for CIPD qualification, HR qualification. When I did that, I did a thesis on motivation, and I looked at the motivation for councillors to become councillors. And this is so it was interesting seeing the results of that quick survey we did there, which sort of correlated a lot to my findings when I did my consultation for the thesis. I did in fact get feedback from over 1,000 individual councillors in all sectors, not just parish and town, but the majority were parish and town councillors. Sorry, that's the local train just going past. Okay, so I'll not go through the agenda, but primarily there are two types of motivation. There is extrinsic motivation, which comes from external factors such as rewards and punishments or carrot and stick. And there is intrinsic motivation, and that is what comes from within. So that's when you really, if you think of when you have a passion for something or something along those lines, that would be an intrinsic motivator to do something. So how does that correlate into councillors? The findings we got when we did the survey was that the intrinsic motivators are people who generally want to do good for the community. And a survey we've just done there, thankfully, 56% of the councillors, that's the reason why they become councillors. And that, as I say, roughly correlates with what we came up with when we did our bigger survey. They are the good councillors to have. They come on for the good of the community, like David was talking about when he started at his parish council, ended up being RFO and proper officer, etc. They come on to do good for their community. There's also the one-trick pony intrinsic motivators. This can be a negative one-trick pony. They can come in with an issue. Or they come in with a positive one trick that they want to achieve, which could be anything from declaring a climate emergency to achieving a new children's play area, perhaps. You often get young mums coming onto councils trying to do that for the areas they live in, for example. The extrinsic motivators can be status. We've probably all come across councillors, well, we will have, I'm sure of this, from my survey. People who come on who want status amongst the peers, they want to be known as Councillor Smith, and they're very proud of that achievement. Occasionally it's for a CV. I did come across a few of that in my own career. Equally, it can be a sense of obligation to third parties. So it could be to a political group. So you sometimes get what's known as a paper candidate standing. Just as an aside, I was once assistant returning officer at a principal authority. And at one of our elections, a paper candidate was the Labour Council got voted in 47 out of 49 seats on the back of the 97 Blair election. And they had quite a number of paper candidates, one of whom was told he would definitely never get voted on. And he'd gone into the free bar, which the Labour Party had at the count, at the back of the count. And he was so drunk he couldn't get on the stage. And sadly, he didn't last very long as a councillor either. So you can have paper candidates who actually are not there for the right reasons as well. It could be a friend or a relative. Sometimes, especially if there's issues on a council, they may want to try and get the majority support for their policy that they want to drive through the council. So they persuade friends and relatives to stand on the council to get a block vote in effect. Occasion in the financial gain there, that can be applied obviously for principal authorities. As far as I'm aware, the highest paying parish or town council for councillors' allowances in the country is around the 1,400 per annum mark. There may be some a little bit higher than that, but I'm not aware of them. There is other potential financial gain. They might come in with illegal ideas of perhaps influencing planning decisions, etc. That can result in a criminal charge, in fact, for misfeasance in public office. of which there were over 100 cases last year. Not necessarily in the parish and town council sector, but there have been quite a lot of cases for that in the recent times. Extrinsic motivating then. So as far as a councillor goes, normally a motivator for people to go to work would include your pay and your pension. They don't apply to councillors, obviously, especially in the parish and town council sector. However, an extrinsic motivator can be status, it can be work conditions, and it can be relationships. So once they're in there, they get this. If a councillor is within a council, if they feel involved and they become part of the furniture, so to speak, and they build relationships in the council, that can continue to motivate them to come and be an active part of the council. It does, as I say, it does encourage them to come to council activities and meetings. You will come across councillors, and we'll have all come across this, where councillors do drop off, and this is often because they do not find the extrinsic motivators they thought were going to be there, or it could be for intrinsic factors, which we'll come on to in a moment. But those that don't find these factors will drop off very quickly. Hence, we see a lot of, and the lady mentioned that 10 councillors lost, I think it was in the North Horsham, was it, this year. There may be reasons for that, which we may come to in a minute. There will be reasons for that, I'm sure. This type of motivation, the extrinsic, doesn't create a role that's enjoyable or rewarding. It just really gets councillors through the door, and no more than that. To keep them within, there needs to be intrinsic motivation. And this can include things like satisfaction within the role. So that can be they achieve something. It can be something as small as securing planning approval, recommendation of plan approval from the council, or planning objection from the council to a local issue. Or it could be as big as developing a new skate park or providing a new service to the local community. It can be gaining promotion, i.e. becoming a chair of a committee, or even the mayor or chairman of the council. Personal development, that is, as was just mentioned about the training, just improving their knowledge and their ability to therefore function as a councillor through training is a big factor in retaining councillors. There are councillors that do not want to do training, but they are probably the ones that have come in for extrinsic factors and haven't come in because of intrinsic factors. You are given responsibility, that again, empowerment. So it may be as simple as a councillor going out and collecting surveys or consulting with the public. That gives them motivation, as well as personal achievement, which can be when they achieve some success that they've been helping to achieve as a councillor. I think a good example I came across was we had a group of councillors who went out and developed a hanging basket scheme within the local commercial sector. They'd knocked on the doors of all the businesses and got them all to support hanging basket scheme around the town centre. They did really well, and you could see those councillors grow in confidence because of that. Just a little quote there: the quality of the human experience at work is the intrinsic factor. So when someone's at work, and this applies to being a councillor, if they have intrinsic positivity there, that will improve the quality of what they're doing at work. I should say we do a similar training session for councillors to give them a better understanding of how to motivate their employees. And that is an area that we come across where there's a big breakdown, unfortunately, in the councils that we end up dealing with, where they've got problems. A lot of it does come back to they weren't motivating the employees and vice versa. So the 4 intrinsic rewards are considered to be a sense of meaningfulness, a sense of choice, a sense of competence, and a sense of progress. So the meaningful role, I didn't know this slide was going to do that. Sorry, I'll come back to that. A meaningful role is you make a difference. within your community. So the 56% of people who are there to make a difference, they get feedback internally because they're making a difference. It could be with a generally making a difference, or it could be a specific project for the one-trick pony councillors. And it becomes a role that you have a passion for. So how can it be made meaningful for councillors? I don't know if is it possible for anyone to put on any suggestions how they believe their roles are meaningful. I don't know if we've got time for that. Is that possible, John?
100%, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if any comments can come up. I don't know if I'll be able to see them actually.
People can drop in the comments there if you can find comments, but also feel free to shout out.
All right, yeah, shout out if you wish.
I think it's to change the quality of residents' lives, improve the quality in their community, and to try and make sure that any growth is carefully managed so that people who live there aren't unhappy with the changes that are happening. Many reasons.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a councillor coming in with a general community good approach, most definitely. So council role can be meaningful by providing strategic targets of the council. This is an area that we often find the councils that are a little bit rudderless and often have quite a bit of conflict within. They do not have a strategic plan. A strategic plan can be as simple as a list of 10 projects. It doesn't have to be complicated. Or it can be it can be a comprehensive document that you do a lot of consultation on to deliver, and it can be a 4-year plan. Again, we deliver training sessions on how to develop strategic planning, and we come on site and support councils to develop their own strategic plan as well. But the councils that, unfortunately, probably 50% of our business is actually dealing with councils where they're dysfunctional, and without exception, except for one case, none of them had a strategic plan. So you do wonder. And then if you look at the NALC annual Council of the Year awards, every single one has a strategic plan. The best councils in the country. They have some form of make sure they stick on target. But it's also motivational for the councillors to have a strategic plan, because they can see that they're achieving against objectives, which is very motivational for individual people. It also generates a passion for what council is doing, so long as it's what the community, the council want. So if the councillors, like the example of the hanging baskets, is going off and getting a hanging basket scheme set up with the blessing of the council, fantastic. If they went off and did that by themselves without the blessing of the council, and then said, oh, we need to spend £2,000 on these new hanging baskets, that wouldn't be so positive. It's got to be in partnership and done well. But that's all part of the training as well. If the councils are trained well, they'll understand how to do things properly. So yes, the councillors can have responsibility, but obviously what you can't do, because of Section 101, is delegate to councillors to carry out executive functions on behalf of the council. They can only, the decisions have to be made by either the committee, council, or officers. But that doesn't mean that they can't go out and do tasks, so long as it's with the blessing of the council and they're not making executive decisions. So the councillors can gain more choice. They can be given support to go out and do tasks on behalf of the council. It can be anything as simple as being the individual who raises the different flags for the council. We had a councillor who used to do that, and when I was on the South Coast working, we had 27 different flags to raise and lower at different times, and some of them several times a year. So particularly the Union Jack and the George Cross, of course. But we had a councillor who had a schedule and just went off and did that, and that really motivated him. He was playing his part in the community, and it can be good for the council to have a sense of choice for the councillors, so long as they do not overstep the mark, you know, and there is that caveat there. But again, that comes back to training the councillors so they understand what they can and can't do, which is really important. And yes, they can take ownership of a task. You know, the hanging baskets is a great example. They're given permission to go out and get people to sign up for hanging baskets. That way you would then water and provide, but they paid us money. And within a few weeks, we had 200 businesses supporting the hanging basket scheme in the town, which we'd never had before. So that was a really good example of how councillors can do positive things and be given the sense of choice to do that. Sense of competence, well, this really comes from training and experience. And really the councillors need to be given training, and there will be some councillors who don't want to do training. We've all come across that, and hence the comment that John mentioned about Eleanor Green, the internal audit. I saw that as well, John. You know, where governors have to do training, councillors don't. There's been, I mentioned earlier, been in the sector for 35 years. In all of those 35 years, there's always been a drive to make it compulsory for councillors to train. It still hasn't happened. Whether it ever will, we'll wait and see. But it would be a good thing, because I think it would make sure that the councillors that came on board were there for the right reasons as well. So training gives a sense of competence, as well as obviously the longer you are a councillor, you become more experienced and knowledgeable. And also feedback from the public and from officers is really good. We should always remember that you know, the councillors need feedback, and when they're doing well, just as much as officers do. A philosophy I've always followed with staff is that I would always give them at least 2 praises compared to 1, pointing them in the right direction. I avoid using the word criticism, to make sure that they were motivated. Achieving against objectives, again, this comes back to having a strategic plan. If the council has a strategic plan and you can see that you're getting things done, it gives everyone a great sense of competence. By the way, I can see people making notes. I am happy to share these slides after the event through John, if John's okay with that. I'm quite happy to share the slides. Yeah. Cheers, John. How can you improve competence? Ensure you have training methods in place, such as councillor training programme. And this is something that I think the sector needs to look at much more seriously, is an annual individual feedback for councillors. You know, CIPD says employees should get an annual appraisal. We should also do one-to-ones as well. But why don't we do that with councillors? And why don't we have a one-to-one meeting with each councillor, so that we can plan their training for the coming year, and we can give them feedback on what's going well and what's not going so well. Again, some councillors won't take part, but that doesn't mean you don't do it for those who want to take part. And it just helps build relationships. Again, our experience is that we did 21 settlement agreements last year with officers, and in every single one of those, relationships are broken, and that's why people had to leave on settlement agreements. Managing a relationship is a really important skill for a clerk, and part of that could well be having an individual review with each councillor. It takes time, but I actually believe that time is gained 10 times over if you do it well. And I think this is something that the sector should look at more seriously going forward. Gain experience from third parties is another way of getting competence. Feedback from colleagues, good and bad. Getting feedback on council performance by the public, obviously, and also annual consultation. The councillors are out there in the community, and they do get feedback, and if it's positive, that is going to improve their sense of competence as well. So an achieving council will do very well to get the feedback. And when you do have success, you celebrate that success. You know, I think that's something we fail to do at times as councils. We should celebrate success a lot more than what we actually do when we achieve against targets and objectives. So a sense of progress is partly if you break a target down. If you have a big target, break it down into individual elements. So as the old saying, inch by inch is a cinch, yard by yard is a hard. John Bithaway. Break tasks down to just so that you can feel as if you are progressing through what may be a large task, but you're getting there, you're moving through the task and you are achieving. So you get this sense of progress, which is motivational. Monitor the performance, report back on progress. This can be through committees or working groups or management team meetings. But the more people understand that you are making progress, the more positive everyone is about what you are trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. And as you tick off, as you go through your targets, your main targets and your strategic plan, tick them off as complete and celebrate that as well. And give praise and credit where appropriate. As I mentioned earlier, I've always believed in giving 2 lots of praise for every single time that I may well be pointing out an error, at least 2 times, just to keep people positive and motivated, and make sure that they are still buying into the organisation. And creating a culture of positivity is really important. Not one of the councils that we deal with where they've got problems is a positive environment. They're always a negative environment. And it is about achieving how to achieve that positivity within the organisation. And I think one of the good examples is the one-to-ones with councillors, but I'll give you some other examples in a minute of how to achieve that. So what can you do to manage the various motivators? So the intrinsic motivators, the ones that generally want to do good for the community, 56% of the councillors on this call, they tend to already be heavily involved in community. Brownie leader, that could be running the local walk group, it could be anything, but they do tend to be doing other things as well. But generally, these are the easiest councillors to work with for officers. These are the ones that you really do want and cherish, and therefore you should look after them, which comes back to the one-to-one meetings with them. If you have a one-to-one meeting with these councillors, they will really appreciate it, and they will work even harder for you as a council going forward. It helps them to achieve for the council and for the community by just supporting these councillors and giving them as much as you can in terms of support from the council and the officers. The one-trick pony intrinsic motivator, they often have the negative ones often have an issue with a particular policy, and I did very sadly come across a case, and I can say the council because it was in the press. It's a council in West Sussex called Stenning Parish Council, and they had a group of councillors who actively campaigned to become councillors with the sole objective of preventing a new skate park being built. And they achieved their objective, sadly. I just thought it was a very, very sad council, and the officers, when I was in the council, just looked totally henpecked, quite frankly, and not surprisingly, most of them left not long after. So they come on with a one-trick pony. It's worth looking out for these individuals. They can have obviously a seriously negative impact on the council and staff morale. Training and education on the project may change their minds, giving them the reasons why the skate park was being developed, what the issues are with sound, which they felt was going to be terrible, noise pollution, etc., and how to ameliorate all of the risks they were highlighting, rather than just jumping in and cancelling the whole project. So training and education can certainly help. If they are prevented in achieving their objective because they're not in the majority, which they were at Stenning Parish Council, they can become frustrated and can attack officers and colleagues. And these are one of the groups of councillors that we've come across a lot in our investigations who do cause a lot of problems for councils. They do sometimes resign because they get frustrated because they're not achieving their objective. However, as I've mentioned there, if it is the majority decision of the council to do the negative project, then unfortunately the officers have to support that and work with that. What shouldn't happen is the officers try and prevent the policy of the council, even when you don't agree with it. That's when we have problems as well with settlement agreements and investigations. They can sometimes, the one-trick pony, want to achieve a positive and I've come across lots of examples of this. It can be parents who come on wanting to refurbish the children's playground, or it can be they want to provide a new service in the town. Sometimes it can be something the council can't do, so they quickly become disillusioned because of that. So it is trying to then convert them into a generally a community-minded councillor rather than a one-trick pony councillor. That provide them with support in a professional manner, and try and get their project included in the point them in the direction of getting their project included in the strategic plan. With majority support, that then should be a project that gets delivered on. So what can you do to manage the various motivators? So for the extrinsic motivated individuals, these are often background councillors. So they tend not to get heavily involved in council activity. I know a lot of councillors now do digital agenda and minutes, but quite often these will be the councillors who you'll see open the envelope for the first time at the meeting. We've all seen people do that. You can usually tell who does that because the envelope hasn't been opened before with the agenda items in. They can be motivated to be more intrinsically motivated with encouragement, which includes giving them training, the one-to-one meeting, and seeing the council achieve and giving them encouragement. So they, for all have come on the council just for status or for the CV, you can change them into being councillors that that do become genuinely community minded. Sorry, I didn't know I was going to do that. Well, that looks a bit small, doesn't it? Sorry, I'll enlarge that before I send it out. I don't know why that one's so small. So what motivates councillors to contribute to stay? A sense of meaningfulness. This is where the council is achieving public recognition of achievements and getting the credit as well. This is something that I was always taught, and I had a chief exec when I was in a unitary authority who probably many people would have called him the grey man because he was always in the background. But as a unitary authority, we achieved a lot. But the chief exec was always in the background and the councillors were at the foreground. And that is how it should be, because they are there to set the policy. Once the officers have done the work, let the councillors take the credit. Again, this is an area where it does lead to conflict, where pointed elbows might come into place and officers push to the front to take credit for things. It might be them that's done all the work, but still give the credit to the councillors and the council as a whole, not the individual officer. Sense of choice, consultation, points in the direction the council makes the decisions. So, you know, it is the council that decides on the policy of the council and the individual councillors. So this does motivate councillors to contribute and stay. It can be a tricky one, as the councillors can make decisions on their own, but when they're in a group, they obviously do set the policy of the council. The clerk can act on information given by councillors within the council's norms, strategy or obligation. So they obviously the clerk or the officers do have delegated power to go off and make decisions, which is how a council has to operate. But so they do have plenty of choice, but given choice to the councillors really comes about in meetings where they're just setting the policy. Again, it's this walk on the tightrope between acting on behalf of the council and making decisions for the council. They've got to be careful not to do that. We have dealt with a case recently where in a very small parish council, the chairman of the council gave a grant to a walking group for some alpine poles. It didn't go through a council meeting. A resident took umbrage with the parish council for another reason, nothing to do with the poles, but spotted that the councillor had done this without any authority. The end result was, after the investigation, that the chairman of the council had to pay the £1,500 for the poles from her own money, and she then resigned. So it was a bit of a disaster where she'd made an executive decision like that, which wasn't legal. So sense of competence, what motivates councillors to stay, and ensure they get training. Look at internal training sessions for the whole council, can have a higher attendance rate. Do regular update training sessions. Have a training program as well. You know, if you have a training program as part of your committee agenda and full council and committee schedule for the year, include some dates in that for training sessions, and get those planned in advance, so that they're in the diary and councillors get a good attendance then. But it is important that you do continue to provide them with training. A sense of progress is things like reporting on progress against your strategic plans. Publicise that and celebrate the achievements as well. That will definitely motivate councillors if they can see that the council is achieving things. A council that's not really got anywhere that it's aiming for, they won't get any sense of progress whatsoever. It'll just be, it'll end up becoming a bureaucratic tumble dryer, I call it. I've come across a few councils where they just get lost in having lots and lots of meetings, but they're not doing any services. And that's because they've got no objectives. So they just have meetings about meetings. I dealt with a council recently that had a budget of less than 100,000, but had 2 officers, and in total over a year they had 96 meetings, but they weren't delivering any services, and they couldn't understand what they were doing wrong until I sat them down and explained that they were there to provide services, not to provide meetings. I've never yet seen a member of the public walk down the high street and say that the council meetings at their council are the best in the country, but they will say that the council has provided a new children's play area, it's done this really good service, it's had a really good event. They will pat you on the back for that, but they'll never say well done on having lots of nice meetings. What can the council do to manage the various motivators? So these are the key things really, is have a training program and budget for all councillors. So as I mentioned earlier, build that into your committee cycle so that you have training dates set in at the beginning of the annual year. Create a learning culture within the council, for officers and for councillors, obviously, and embrace councillors' contributions so that they feel valued. Encouraging councillors to get involved and do things within the parameters of what they can and can't do. Have an annual one-to-one with councillors. I can't emphasise how good this does work if you do this. The difference it makes to a council. And don't get me wrong, I've had councils where not everyone wants to do it, but usually it's about 80 or 90% of the councillors want to do it. Do it with them. The ones that don't want to do it, don't let them stop the others doing it. You sometimes find that actually the ones that didn't want to do it in year 1 do it in year 2. They change their mind. Have a strategic plan. If you haven't got a plan, how do you know where you're going? And how do you know when you've achieved success? So you must have a strategic plan as a council. And as I say, it can be as simple or as complicated as you want. Don't make it too complicated. Just have clear, smart objectives. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-constrained objectives. Have smart objectives and you will achieve. Get feedback. That's from the public and from stakeholders, and councillors. And don't let the naysayers hold back the rest. That is sometimes what happens at councils. You can have a couple of dominant negative councillors that do cause a lot of problems. Don't let them hold back the rest of the council. And as I've mentioned earlier, do celebrate success. It's really important that you do that, and let the public see that you've achieved things as well. Publicise it. So this is just what we do, and that's what people have to say about us. And that is the slides over. So I'm quite happy